The video you are watching came to you from a specific interface. YouTube is designed not only to best display videos, but also to actually draw you into watching more of them. As much as it is a mechanism you interact with, it is also a mechanism which encourages you, through clever design, you to interact with it in a specific way. You'll never find clocks in casinos because they don't want you thinking you've spent too long in there. You'll always see little spur-of-the-moment candies right next to the cash register because that's where you wait in line and have your willpower to say no to sugar gradually broken. Likewise, you don't see an involved and elaborate commenting system on YouTube because comments don't sell ads, and the time you spend here is only valuable to Google if you're watching those. If you're watching videos. A good commenting system which encourages discussion would suck you away from the more lucrative aspect of this site. Now that's not to say that commenting and engaging with the little buttons is not important, but probably the algorithm which recommends videos is more interested in how often viewers clicked ads than they are in how much discourse the video started. YouTube is not a site for watching videos. No, really. It's a site for watching ads. The videos are just the delivery method, and to maximize the revenue generated, YouTube prioritizes the best performing videos with its homepage. Suffice it to say, interfaces matter. When it comes to video game interfaces, the HUD is arguably the most important visual element. Context-sensitive prompts, inventories, and pause menus are all important, but the HUD is, usually, there from beginning to end, both in the individual game experience, but also in a more meta sense. We have HUDs to this day, and if we travel back to the beginning, if we go back to the arcades, lo and behold, the HUD is not universal. Back in the day, games were in a very real sense about competition, fighting another opponent or their high score. Zoom out a bit and you can see that the biggest arcade games all had a HUD. They all had dedicated zones on the screen to tally up your score, and these spaces are important. However engaging the gameplay in any of these games might be, without the scoring system you really don't have a great idea for progress being made. Sure, scoring systems in arcades were largely a social proof / addiction machine to get you chasing high scores, pumping quarters into the machine all the while, but regardless, this helped these games direct play. And the same applies when we get into consoles. HUDs can convey information which otherwise would go lost, and in doing so can tell you numerically what is and is not important. A lot of great games, such as Eco and Silent Hill, have showcased that a game does not strictly speaking need a HUD, but both of those games also exemplify why HUDs are often used. Sure, Eco does not have a HUD, but Eco is also incredibly restricted in what its story can be about minute to minute, because everything you need to know about every goal must be made clear by the possible animations of the characters on screen, by context-sensitive prompts, level design, or by the cutscenes. Silent Hill, on the other hand, exemplifies why HUDs are used by leaning into what the ramifications of dropping them are. Enemies don't have health bars, so you need to kind of intuit how much life they have left. Since the ammo count and Harry's vitality are locked behind the inventory screen, you need to manually count your ammo and pay attention to damage taken. Because this information isn't sprayed on screen at all times, there's a lot of uncertainty minute to minute, and that works really well for Silent Hill because it's a horror game. The same applies to the old Resident Evils, and what do you know, when the series made action more central to the experience, we also see the inclusion of an ever-present heads-up display. Then, games like Dead Space came and tried to meet in the middle, integrating the HUD into the character design so as to provide that necessary information without compromising the cinematic presentation. But on that cinematic presentation, I feel that as the idea of how AAA games play has become more homogenized, we're kinda losing something really beautiful. To play well, games need to provide the player with information, and it seems like less and less games are experimenting with this, or getting really into their UI elements, and instead just present these sorts of wishy-washy, non-offensive, but also very wallpapery HUDs. It's there, it doesn't feel out of place, exactly, it shows you the necessary numbers, but other than that, it doesn't really add anything, and it doesn't need to be this way. Interfaces can elevate experiences. And to illustrate my point, let's briefly talk about Ratchet & Clank. This series is set in a garage junk sci-fi universe, and while the HUD is a sort of digital minimalist thing, at least by 2002 standards, the interfaces still present the world's aesthetic. And they do that by emulating CRT TVs. They have those interlacing lines, the scan-facing and static. And that actually did some legwork to prop up the overly manufactured feel of the world. Subsequent games ditched the first's interface in favor of something more slick, maybe because CRT TVs were on the way out as the series got going, but I can't help escape the feeling that it would have been better if the interface had been kept. Is anyone out there going to tell me that this completely generic store interface is an improvement over this one? So, yeah, the visual interface can prop up the aesthetics. But what about the actual content of the game? Can the visual interface make the act of playing the game more impactful? Well, yes. The old Fallout interfaces did exactly that. Every interactive visual element there was contained within these ugly retro machines from a world that never got rid of moving parts. But ugly or not, it's world building. These graphical interfaces are evoking the futurism of the era before the nukes fell in the Fallout universe, and that they are rusted as and worn out hammers home the post-apocalyptic aesthetic. Simplistic stuff, sure, but imagine if this game had more cinematic aspirations and did away with this in favor of just generic minimalist digital text. Oh, that's right. Now look. Whichever games you prefer, don't you think it's weird that the 3D Fallouts don't embrace their old UI aesthetic when literally everyone loves it? And these Fallout interfaces keep getting worse, which is strange because this seems to be a design direction which literally nobody approves of. I guess I shouldn't be picking on this series though, since even today, it goes much further than most. I mean, the data screens are all still contextualized as happening in the Pip-Boy, and hey, the power armors are actually kinda neat. I mean, sure, it's not as cumbersome as the series' legacy might make you expect, and everything feels a bit cleaner than the world it exists within, but since these games are now more about the third-person action and exploration than they are role-playing, I guess it makes more sense to prioritize letting the player see than immersing the player with the interface. But then, I remember that one series which had way more serious action and did much more with its interface as well. A series which, as it got going, embraced the interface for immersion like few others, and did so without ever compromising on its trigger-finger combat. I am of course talking about From Software's Armored Core. Look at this display. There is a special thermometer which is just there to tell me what the temperature of the enemy mech is currently running at. There's also a completely useless speedometer. It works, but there's no need for me as the player to know how fast I'm going. That doesn't actually translate into any of my missions. There's one GUI element dedicated to giving you information on your enemy's weapon and another for their energy. There's a freaking airplane altimeter telling us our elevation, and you know why that feature is there? It's so the game can reinforce the world. The Armored Core universe got pollution mad and then went to space, in later entries, and to survive, humanity had to build underground cities. How to reinforce to the player that they're underground? Simple. The elevation gauge goes into minus numbers. And there is so much to this, and it is so busy, and so little of it is actually needed, but I play with all of it equipped because the game makes me want to do it. The busy HUD emulates the feel of the overly complex pilot seat of a mech, so even though most of these visuals are just in the way and they don't tell me anything I need to know, I keep them on, because they deepen the immersion of piloting the mechs. Imagine that, optional HUD elements which exist solely for immersion reasons. Whenever you see footage of Armored Core, it's always kind of a lie, because you're likely just gonna see the combat, but 50% of the game actually looks like this. Yeah, it's a game about the loadout, like the old Rainbow Six games were. The combat missions are mostly there to give you something to test your customizing and planning against, because secretly, these games are about a very specific kind of mech fantasy, and so every choice, big and small, you make is another layer to that experience. Every single mech part has like 15 numbers to keep track of, and every single one of those matters to your actual performance. You can spend literally an hour just in the menu trying to squeeze out an extra 10% energy efficiency by checking every available generator to every other one, and that is actually really engaging. Armored Core knows that the mech fantasy doesn't begin and end with fighting in one of these things, and it takes advantage of its video game elements to deliver on this. To simulate the world in which the game takes place, we have a mech economy to interact with, where we buy and sell parts. To simulate the feel of the pilot's seat, we have an insanely bloated HUD interface, and to expand on the world building, there is a mail section in the menu, just so that the game can advance a narrative, and the narrative branching is done outside of cutscenes, and much of it is super contextual stuff, like which companies you sided with, and the only way you're really going to get that, there's this whole world of conspiracies, is by engaging with the different interfaces. Armored Core is like Papers, Please with mechs, and I wouldn't have it any other way. This isn't a doomsday prediction video. The interface isn't dying, there are still game designers who understand that it can be more than a means to provide information, but in big budget titles this seems less the case. Almost as if the industry conceptualization of it seems to be that it's kind of a problem that needs to be solved, that all its value is in the information it imparts to the player, or in its ability to cheat the player character into performing actions which aren't actually available to the player outside of highly scripted moments. Cinematic aspirations dominate all aspects of design, and every other avenue for interactive storytelling must be kinda kneecapped to facilitate this. And it all feels so unnecessary because games can do both. The biggest cinephile video game director, the man who pretty much standardized the use of cutscenes, is Hideo Kojima, and he just so happens to also love really deeply realized menus, interfaces, and HUD elements which direct play. If he can make delivering packages and balancing them on your back while walking down a mountain really engaging, then maybe the AAA industry is thinking about interfaces all wrong. Not every game needs to make a big showcase with every single element in it, but games aren't just about moving people from one location to another and then watching a cutscene. And moving forwards, I really want games to move away from this formula and embrace the unique quirks of the interactive presentation when it comes to telling stories. So, here's to the interface. Thanks for watching.